we were waiting very patiently to see the outcome, is there was an appeal of the decision by the EU to ban the importation of seal skins, and today the EU decided that it will uphold the ban on the importation. So you just saw a little section of videos of what we've been up to, and I apologize if most of it is US-based. But it now is an international world of international corporations, and everything we do in one country has obviously a knock-on effect in every other country. I see us as a united band of people working for animals. Animals know no nations. We're all in this together. That, however, is where we've been, and I want to talk about where we're going, and I want to talk about the one thing that will change everything, and that is the key, the absolute key to how we make change. Because I think everybody in this room abhors what's happening to animals and wants to make sure that we do change it. First, I'm going to ask you to engage in a little exercise with me, to decide that, to imagine that we are going together on a holiday. We'll go to somewhere exotic. I was going to say Egypt, but that's perhaps a little too exotic at the moment. But let's say we go to the Middle East somewhere where we can, and we go to our hotel. We get to our hotel the first night. We are looking forward to a beautiful dinner out somewhere in some quarter of the city. So we leave our hotel and we go down the street. It's quite dark. And as we're walking, suddenly we notice other people have just moved out of the way. A lorry pulls up, and some men jump us and force us into the back of this lorry. And we are very frightened. We don't know what's happening. It's dark inside the lorry, the truck. And we can hear people breathing. Our eyes start to adjust. And we hear there are people crying, there are children, everybody is extremely frightened, and someone says to us, they're taking us to kill us. We're going to be killed. And we just don't know what we can do. So the truck is going down the highway, and suddenly it comes to a screeching halt, perhaps at a light. I'm leaning on the back door, and just at that moment it just swings open a bit and I fall out. It swings back and the lorry takes off again. And I look around and I think, has anyone seen that I've escaped? And no, the driver hasn't noticed. So I hide, I wait, my heart is in my mouth, and I'm thinking, any minute now, but the truck goes. And I make my way as best I can back to the hotel. I get upstairs to my room, still in a state of total panic, and I close the door. And then what do? I know you're still on the truck. Other people are still on the truck. But what do? Do I turn on the television? Do I take a shower? Do I read a magazine? Or do I get help? And it's a fair question, because there are individuals just like us who are on the trucks now. People from Pig Save and Cow Save know that. They see it every day. But there are people on those trucks who desperately need our help. Do we pick up a magazine? Do we go out to dinner? Do we remember them, and do we do something? I know we can't do something every moment of our lives, but we have to remember in the hurly-burly of everything that's going on that they're there, they're depending on us, they're just like you and just like me. Humans are very funny creatures. I think they're very amusing. We tend to think of ourselves as being highly superior because one of us invented Cheetos and another of us the self-cleaning oven, although I doubt the self-cleaning oven really works. When I've tried it, it certainly hasn't. But the other individuals don't fret over what sort of blouse goes with what slacks or which kind of latte they're going to have. And yet, in the ways that count, we are absolutely all the same. And I would guess that most people here tonight don't actively abuse animals. I would guess that most people here probably don't eat animals, don't wear animals, don't go to circuses that use animals, that you are very aware of the power of your consumerism and how it can affect the lives and deaths of animals. And that's wonderful, because we relate to what President Lincoln said when he said, if we ourselves would not wish to be slaves, then we surely do not wish to be masters. But understanding that isn't enough. Changing ourselves isn't enough. That's not the key. The key is that we change ourselves, and then we move on, and we change other people. We are not enough. We have to be educators. We have an office in Washington, D.C. It's actually on 16th Street, and you know the White House is 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. So if you look down 16th Street, you can see Michelle Obama hanging out the washing. Or almost. She may have someone else who does that for her. But in January, it was the presidential inauguration, as you know. And that was a magical moment for a number of reasons, perhaps not what you might think. It was a day of firsts. And I am not touting the Obama administration. Here we had, in our election, we had a choice between a man who thinks that a photo opportunity is inviting a foreign leader to eat a bacon cheeseburger, and a man, Mitt Romney, who thinks the way that you take your dog on vacation is in a crate on the top of your car. So we didn't really have much from the animals' point of view to choose from. We're not in Holland, where they have the Animals Party, or here in Canada, and you have the Animal Alliance. It's small, but it exists. We don't have that. But the inauguration delivered a stunning history lesson to all of us. There was the first Hispanic woman Supreme Court Justice, Sotomayor, who was swearing in our Vice President Joe Biden. There was the widow of the slain civil rights leader Medgar Evers, who lost his life for his cause. She was giving the invocation. And then there was Richard Blanco, who was the first gay, or first openly gay, who knows, poet, laureate, reading his poems to the nation. I didn't like his poem, but he may not like the one I have later, so we'll be even. So, to me, watching all these people stream down 16th Street to the National Mall so they could listen to all these people speak was a wonderful moment to imagine that we had come from total discrimination of members of our very own species to this day when there was access for people with disabilities, and it seemed that every part of society that had previously been shunned was now recognized. So it crystallized for me the reality that if movements work hard enough, and that's the key, if they educate others to what they have grasped themselves, that change is all possible. And that animal rights will happen if, as one of the Peta members I love, Jeannie Daniels, says, we don't have a wishbone where a backbone ought to be. And that's the key. Like the movements before us, we have to seize every chance to impose justice. A little while ago, I was listening to the radio, and I heard a story that I found particularly relevant. It was about a woman called Susan Enron. And Susan Enron had a real bigot as a father. And he was a very imposing figure. If he heard her upstairs in her bedroom, listening to a sitcom, and there were black people on the sitcom, or it was a sitcom about black people, he would come up to the room and tell her, switch that thing off. I don't like you listening to those N-words. And she had never said anything. At the dinner table, he would tell hideous racist jokes. So Susan Enron was watching one of these Turner Classic stations, and there came on a film called Gentleman's Agreement. I don't know if anyone has seen it. It's from 1947, so it's even older than I am. And in the film, there is a woman who is in love with Gregory Peck. But Gregory Peck thinks that she's anti-Semitic. And the woman, this is upsetting their relationship, apparently. So the woman goes to see her friend, and she says to her friend, here's the situation, he thinks I'm anti-Semitic, but I'm not. And her friend says, well, how did he get this idea? She said, well, I was at a dinner party, and there was a man at the dinner party who was telling atrocious jokes, calling people kikes and wops and all these names. And she said, but I didn't join in, I was upset. And her friend said, yes, but what did you do? She said, well, I wanted to slap him, I wanted to stand up, I wanted to scream out, stop that. And he said, but what did you do? And of course she hadn't done a thing. She said, I sat there. Well, Susan Enron, with the racist father, was looking at this Gentleman's Agreement film, and it was an epiphany for her. So when she went home to have dinner with the family the next time, and her father started to tell those jokes, she put her head down and she said, Daddy, I don't think that's funny. And her father said, why? She said, because I work with women and I work with black people and they are wonderful individuals. And her father was quiet. After the dinner, her brothers came up and congratulated her and said, we've never said anything to Dad. This is wonderful, thank you for speaking up. And from that moment forward, dinner was never the same in that household. Those jokes stopped. And the same is true today with gay activism. If somebody says something, someone in office says something today against a person who is gay, derides somebody, there are repercussions. That wasn't always the case. It was carte blanche for people to say things to deride gays. But today there are repercussions. So if we're proud of our beliefs, that as Martin Luther King said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. A banner we carried at Peta for Martin Luther King's 50th just recently. If we believe that, then we have to speak up. We have to be heard. We have to make sure we're acknowledged. And we will achieve repercussions. And that's a start. Already, when Peta gets involved in something and people hear that we're involved, they tend to get nervous. It's really marvelous. I'll give you a case in point. We called the United States Coast Guard and said, we have a whistleblower that says that you're using live animals in testing. And the person we contacted then sent us an email saying that they were investigating. But you have to love email. They forgot to delete the string underneath. Always such a joy. And they're sure sending it. And underneath there was a top Coast Guard official who had marked it urgent and had sent it to 6 other top Coast Guard officials, and it said, help, help, Peter is complaining, help! So, animals try to stick up for themselves, and they do so, of course, against overwhelming odds. There is, alongside a railway track in Malaysia, a plaque to a particular bull elephant who stuck up for his herd. What happened many years ago, there was a train coming down the tracks. It came down the tracks same time every day, and it happened that this little family of elephants was crossing at the time, and the child, the youngest child, was slow and was on the track, and the train didn't stop and plowed into her and killed her. The next day, the very next day, when the train came back at the same time, the bull elephant was waiting. And as soon as the train was within sight, he stepped onto the tracks, bless his heart, and he raised his trunk as high as he could, and he roared with all his might to tell that train to stop. And the train didn't stop. And that elephant was killed. But there was such an uproar over the death of that elephant from the villagers and the public at large that the man who was driving the train lost his job. There was a law put in place that any train driver who didn't slow down on the track would be punished. And severe penalties were put in place, and the plaque was put up to that bull elephant. The lesson to me is how lucky we are. How lucky we are that we don't have to risk our lives ever to make a point. We just have to be honest. Is it so hard? All we have to do, having seen what animals go through for all these things, is that when someone is casually cruel, when they order the chicken sandwich, why don't we just say what's in our hearts? Why don't we say, I really wish you wouldn't do that or say that? Because animals are wonderful individuals. They're clever, and they feel pain, and they feel love and joy and loneliness, just as we do. And they don't want to lose their lives in these kinds of ways. Can we not just say that, rather than allow the status quo to continue? If we find that little bit of courage within ourselves, then we can get help for all those animals on the lorry, all those animals who are waiting for somebody to do something for them. We can tell people, do nothing for animals. Don't buy the fur. Don't buy the flesh. Don't buy the circus ticket if there are chained elephants in the circus. Don't buy a puppy from a pet shop. Go to the shelter. Don't sit through a film that has somebody driving their truck through the pigeons or the chickens or forcing a horse off a cliff. And you don't have to just quietly walk out. Get up. Go and see the manager. Tell him I'm leaving because I don't think that was right. And I'm not patronizing this film. You can be ever so polite. I do it all the time, and I usually get free popcorn. Now, some people will say, a lot of people will say, well, you know, I mean, I don't really like to impose my choices on others. And my answer to that is, since when is it a legitimate choice to abuse children or animals or the elderly or anyone? It is not. That has to be challenged. And when I find that I have to say something, I also find that sometimes I have to buck up my nerve to do it. I mean, it's not necessarily comfortable, is it, to be the voice that speaks out? It really isn't that bad. But perhaps sometimes it's useful to conjure up the image of one animal who matters to you, one animal you remember seeing who went through something awful, and just say, all right, I'm going to do this now because of him or because of her. And for me, that's a little crab. This is a little crab in the back of a restaurant who was covered in batter, was in a pile of crabs covered in batter, sitting next to a deep fryer, about to go in, and he had decided he was getting out of there. And even though he couldn't see where he was going, he was doing his best to make his way out of that area. And I think of him, and I think, you hadn't got a chance, but I will speak up for you, my brother the crowd. I will remember you, and I will hope to be able to influence someone else on your behalf. It's not that courageous. It does require a little oomph, a little jump start, but it's not that courageous to speak up. What's courageous is in the United States, hunting season is about to start. Going in the woods dressed as a deer would be courageous. Not that you have to dress as a deer, actually, in the United States. They shoot you anyway. They even shoot their own children out there. Although there is encouraging news, there are more and more stories of actually dogs shooting hunters. I don't think they know what they're doing, but they're on the right track. So we won't be slammed into prison for speaking up, and that does happen in many countries, as we know, if we just watch the news. The worst thing that will happen is that someone will come back at us with an invariably ill-thought-through, often truly dumb remark. And you don't have to answer it. I have a friend who says, Ingrid, just because someone rings the doorbell doesn't mean you have to answer it. Because I always want to get in the fray. And you don't have to answer it. And I have a case in point. We had a circus demonstration. We were outside in the street handing out pamphlets, handing out videotapes, and a girl tried to hand this pamphlet to a really nasty man. And he spun around and he said, "Why don't you get a job?" She was 12. And everybody just sort of looked at it, you know, and you just let it dangle out there. It's fine. So, our most cherished right in the free world is freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And we shouldn't waste it complaining about paltry, mundane, banal, rubbish things. We can have a few words, they can be very, very polite words, that will change someone forever. I'm deeply grateful to all the people who helped me, who opened my eyes, who opened my heart. I didn't know, and I loved animals. Without them, I think I would still be wearing my fox fur collar. I would still certainly be eating my way through the animal kingdom. And I cringe to say that I probably wouldn't have spayed my cat if somebody hadn't told me why it was important. I had never been to a shelter at that time. I didn't know. I was oblivious. And we have to think that most people have not seen what we've seen. If they had, many of them would change. So that's where we come in. And people will throw out all sorts of excuses. They'll say to you, "I'm really trying to be a vegetarian." Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? You know, you can understand if somebody said, "I'm really trying to get pregnant." I mean, that's not really up to them, totally. But whether you order the fish sandwich is 100% up to you. How hard are you trying? Or they say, "Well, I have to have cheese." As if some 400-pound person was sitting on their chest and going, "Down it goes." I think what they're trying to do is to get our buy-in. To have those of us who have got away from that, to say to them, "Oh, well, that's all right. I mean, in your own time, do as much as you can." And I don't think we should do it. I think very nicely we should say the Nike thing, which is just do it. Come on, I'll help you, but let's just do it. Timidity gets us nowhere, absolutely nowhere. If we are shrinking violets, we will not make an impact on the world. I have another friend, believe me, I have two of them. I have another friend who opposed the Vietnam War. And when he was in college, all his friends, or some of his friends, were out protesting against the war. And he used to say, well, that's fine, you just do that, but I just don't feel right standing out there holding a placard or chanting. He said, someone might come along who's influential, and they would see me out there, and it just really, it would ruin their opinion of me, so I'm not doing it. So about, a couple decades later, he was driving along, and he looked over at a fur store called Garden House Furs, and there were 5 Peta people holding placards standing outside the fur store. And he drove by and he looked over and he thought, oh, what a ragtag bunch of people. Now that looks really pathetic. And for some reason, the penny dropped. And he thought, this isn't right. I'm totally opposed to fur. You know, maybe instead of 5 people, 6 people will look better. So he parked his car, went back, picked up a placard and joined the demonstration. And there he met the woman he has lived with for the last 20 years who he tries to impress every day. So he's very happy that he finally took the plunge. Taking the plunge is the difficult bit, but once you get there, it's fine. And activism takes so many forms. I don't know if you have that game that we have in the UK, where when you're driving along, your parents take you in the car, and the kids have to tick off every I spy with my little eye. You have that? So I think activism is like that, is that we have this long list of everything that we could do for animals, and through our lives we need to just keep ticking the boxes and doing more and more. Let me show you pictures that we should show everyone. Let's ask, can you deny the love on the faces of these mothers and their children? Who could? That's my favorite. Look at that. I mean, how can anyone say animals don't have feelings? We need to tell everybody we possibly can, and not necessarily people who are listening to us voluntarily. We always have the lift or the grocery line where we can talk to them. Tell everybody that studies show that groundhogs use verbs, that fish tell time. And people say, oh, no, they don't. And you say, well, have you ever known anyone who had a fish in a tank in their home, and they always knew when they were going to be fed? Yes, they do. Insects construct boats. Let's point out that the others come in all different kinds of packages and sizes, in bodies that are slightly different than our own. But it's what's inside that counts, all that counts. This is a whale's eye. This is an elephant's eye. Look at that. And this is a man's eye. There's a person in there, as surely as sure. I saw something once. I was driving in Philadelphia, and it had been a long day, and it was getting to be evening, and I was quite tired. And I came to a little park by the river, the Schuylkill River. And I parked, and I thought I'd just rest, catch my breath a little bit here. And I looked over, and of course animal rights activists can never rest. You just know that something's going to happen. So then, as soon as I parked, and over there I see this man who is fishing. And as I'm watching him, because of course you have to watch, he brings out what must have been the world's longest fish. I couldn't figure out why it was so long. But he was having a problem. He was wrestling with this fish, and he wasn't dispatching the fish. There was something going on. So I got out of the car and went over, and it was an eel. So he had caught this eel on 3 3-pronged gaffs. These are sets of 3 serious sets of hooks that had become embedded in the eel's throat. And so he had a pair of pliers and he had the eel and nothing was working for him. And I said, just give me the eel. I took the towel and I held the eel like this in the towel so that he could put his pliers down and try to take the 3-pronged gaffs out. And so I was holding the eel and the man was working. And then unexpectedly, he lost his temper, lost his patience. And before I could say or do anything, he just yanked. The whole throat of the eel came out of his mouth with the gaps. And at that moment, I was holding the eel right here. And I was eye to eye with that eel. And that eel's shock registering in his eye, his pain, his horror. This experience was crystal clear. He could have been a dog, he could have been me, could have been anybody. There was an individual in that body. Didn't matter what funny little package he came in. He was an individual who was going through horror. So afterwards, I sat down with the man and we talked. And I told him what I felt in a nice way. I told him who animals are, and they do all feel pain. And I have no idea whether he's fishing to this day or he's not fishing. I have no idea. All I know is that if I hadn't tried, he definitely would be fishing. But when we try, we reach some people some of the time. And that, therefore, is our obligation, is always to try to reach as many people as we can. Many of you will know W.H. Auden. He was born in 1907. He wrote a poem that illustrates how even the most well-educated people have been ignorant of animals' abilities through time, ignorant of their sentience. This is what he wrote. As I listened from a beach chair in the shade to all the noises that my garden made, it seemed to me only proper that words should be withheld from vegetables and birds. Not one of them was capable of lying, not one of them knew when it was dying. And in those days, nobody realized that animals are so like us that they do tell lies. Baby chimpanzees will lie to their mothers. They'll blame their siblings for naughty things that they do themselves. And some male chimpanzees will lie to their mates, and they'll craftily have sex behind their mates' backs, something they learned from our members of Parliament or Congress. So in Auden's time, no one knew, like the bottlenose dolphins who whistle individual names of their friends that only those friends have when they're in distress, a parrot gives her baby a unique name that she will forever respond to. That crows have regional dialects. That animals mourn. The dog on his guardian's gravesite, in this Italian case recently, a woman was feeding the dog, and she would take the dog to church on Sunday. She died. Dog still goes to church every Sunday and sits by her pew. And that many animals know that they're dying or come across another animal. There's an elephant here who is cradling the bones of a fallen elephant. And this is a stranger. This elephant doesn't know this other elephant. And this is the noise, the sounds of anguish that this he made. Different cries were recorded being made by that elephant as he came across his fallen friend or stranger. So in Auden's time, few people realized that birds, like dogs and cats, understand extraordinarily sophisticated concepts, like the concept of playing games or having fun. You have to admit that that's a very complex thing for them to understand. In St. Petersburg, people have videotaped crows who fly to the top of the cathedral, get caught in the wind draft, have a wonderful time, and then slide down the stained glass windows on their bottoms. And they've done it so many times that they're actually wearing the stained glass off the windows. But it's a hoot for them. And crows are very funny. I mean, in Japan, there's a little island where there are miniature deer. And the crows have devised, they're always coming up with something, they've devised a game in which they take the deer's little pellets, and they take a pellet and they wait for the deer to be looking in a certain direction, then they fly over and pop the pellet right in his ear. And of course with a hook, you can't get that pellet out. They wish those crows to help. And when I was writing the dog book, I came across all these funny little things, but this doesn't really have anything to do with anything, but I'm going to throw it in. It was in Manhattan that a crowd had gathered. It was the 1920s. Rabies was a big worry. And a dog had come up and was frothing at the mouth. And the crowd was looking at the dog, and they were all worried, and they called the police. And then somebody came elbowing through the crowd, this beautifully dressed woman, and she snatched the dog up, and she said, "Oh, he slipped his collar. I'm so, so sorry. I was sitting at an outdoor restaurant there, and the pastry tray came by, and he grabbed a cream puff, and that's what he's got in his mouth, but he's holding it tight so I won't see it. The cream is coming out of his mouth." All right, let's look at the seagull being clever. You may have seen this. You guys look down at the counter, and then very slowly, and then yes, let's hurry up and get those chips. I just have to watch his expression and how he changes his gait. And he knows exactly where they are. He goes in there every day, So when people say, "Oh, you're attributing human characteristics to animals," and we say, "No, we're not. No, these are shared characteristics." Are you sharing now? Or at least somebody's hoping you will. These are shared characteristics. Things like thinking, being in love, being afraid, feeling lonely are all shared. I think there are baboons somewhere who are saying, no, those are baboon characteristics. But they're not. We share them with all of them. And humans need help understanding the other animals. 200 years ago, the French Academy defined a crab as a small red fish that walks backwards. And that's fine, except the naturalist Cavalier replied to them, "This would be all well and good. In fact, your definition would be perfect, were it not for 3 exceptions. The crab is not a fish, he's not red, and he doesn't walk backwards." And I read that and I thought, how far have we come since then, in 200 years? Because a recent study showed 60% of people today do not know that a cow has to get pregnant and give birth before milk is produced. People just think, 60% of people think that a cow just has all this extra milk. And almost nobody knows that a cow is artificially inseminated. Most cows are artificially inseminated on what farmers call a rape rack. And rape is not a good thing for a female of any species or an individual of any species. We learn all the time. This year we discovered that the tiny gardener's frog, who scientists who study frogs always thought was deaf, can actually hear through sensors in his mouth. We learned that penguins mourn their dead, that sudden aggression in dogs can be a sign of pain, which if you think about it is quite obvious, and that bears can count. And when I heard that, we had just liberated this wonderful bear from a roadside zoo where he had been alone for year after year after year, and I wondered if he was counting every day till he got his freedom. As one researcher said, bears can count. Well, then we are finally not actually smarter than the average bear. We assume much and we know little. Albert Einstein wrote this: a human being is part of the whole, part of the universe. He experiences himself, his thoughts and his feelings as something separate from the rest, a kind of optical delusion of his consciousness. This delusion is a prison, restricting us to our personal desires and to affection only for a few people nearest to us. Our task must be to free ourselves from this prison by widening the circle of our compassion to embrace all living creatures. Wonderful thing to see. We have to remind everyone who looks down their noses at pigeons and pigs that human beings defecated on the streets and in bushes before some bright spark invented plumbing. And in many countries, people still do. That just 80 years ago, 80 little years, tribal people considered human brains a delicacy, the way my father used to like calves' brains on toast. In Darwin's time, expeditions to Borneo were periodically ambushed and the sailors were eaten. In one account, there's a report of how a tribal chief brought his canoe up to the ship and complained to the captain that the sailors tasted awful because they'd been marinated in whiskey and tobacco. He was obviously a natural food fan or somebody who liked Anthony Bourdain. So we mustn't be so high and mighty when we know so little. Also, just a little bit after Darwin's time, there was a priest who stopped in Tierra del Fuego and decided that he was going to disembark. He would take a couple of weeks and he would record the language of the Tierra del Fuego Indians. And he said, it won't take me but 2 weeks because all they make is these grunting sounds. They have very little communication. And of course he was there for 27 years until he died and he still hadn't finished the dictionary. So to put that in perspective, our own species can't speak a word of dog, or dolphin, or duck, or dove, but that's our shortcoming. They all speak to themselves, they all understand each other, just as the Tierra del Fuego Indians understood each other. And in fact, they communicate in many different ways that we're only just scratching the surface of understanding. Ravens don't only talk, they don't even just have sounds. We have just discovered use wing language, flaps, and different configurations of their beaks. They make gestures to each other. Cows use almost imperceptible facial movements that another cow can see, but we haven't a clue what they mean. Rhinos have a breathing language. Elephants express joy by purring. People used to just think their stomachs were rumbling and they were hungry. But they can warn each other over miles of dangers. If someone is killing, as they say, culling, if they're killing elephants over here, elephants here can tell elephants from miles and miles away that there is danger. We can't hear their rumbles because they're at frequencies that are subsonic. And mice use subsonic frequencies to communicate too. We can't hear them. Some animal tribes use clicking sounds, the way some African human tribes use clicking sounds. Others whistle. Some use high-speed sounds that are inaudible to us. If we slowed them down, we still wouldn't understand all that's going on. And underwater microphones show us that fish make sounds that are like the chirps, and the tweets of birds. Last month, we also learned that fish can point. Now, I know they don't have fingers, but there was a study with groupers and wrasse. And you know, the wrasse are sleek fish, and the groupers are big car-like fish. And so what happens is that if the grouper sees a prey animal he wants to eat go into a hole, he over to a wrasse who is sleek enough to get down that hole and get the wrasse's attention by shimmering in front of him. And if the wrasse then follows him like Lassie, they will go over to the hole and the grouper will stand on his head and with his nose point to where he wants the wrasse to go. And the wrasse will go in and flush that other little creature out. That's pretty phenomenal. We just haven't a clue. And the month before that, we had a study out in the paper that shows that chickens can not only count up to at least 5 without our help, but they exercise self-control that most children can't. You can teach a chicken that if he fails to immediately enjoy this berry or this treat in front of him, that a second one will be put there too. He just has to wait, he has to discipline himself. You try that with a child and a sweet. It just doesn't work. But the chicken has enough force for it and has learned that that will have a payback. And now, you may have heard about Peter Gabriel, the musician. He has got together with some of the geniuses in computers at MIT and on the web, and they have put together what they call an internet, interspecies internet. What they did is they gave a keyboard to a bonobo, an ape, and they allowed her to tinker with it. And within minutes, she had composed a little something that pleased her and that she could repeat. And Peter Gabriel said, he's been an animal rights activist for eons. It didn't surprise him. He said, I communicate with people all over the world. I can't speak their languages, they can't speak mine, but we share the language of music, and now there will be an interspecies internet using music. Animals also communicate without saying a word. So the bottom line is not to please let anybody get away with saying that animals are inferior to us, because they are gobsmackingly impressive. They find their way by their noses, which are 1,000 times more sensitive than ours, by the stars, by the Earth's magnetic field, even by radio waves. We've just had an investigation of pigeon racing. And in England, they take pigeons over to the continent and let them go and then force them, they have to fly home. And they fly home to their mates or to their eggs that they've been left behind. And they have to fly over the English Channel. And they've just found that a lot of them don't make it home, many of them drown, because low-frequency radio waves interfere with their ability to home. They think, they figure things out. Let's see this bird figuring things out. No pool. No. Not quite. Bingo. Well, this horse, he decides, he's watched it, he can open his stall, he's watched and he's tried and he's practiced. And look, it's tricky, but I'll figure us through that one. That's not enough. I need my friends. Not you. Yeah, this is somebody I like, let's be honest. And he has to use his teeth and his mouth. I mean, no fingers. Imagine this. Very clever. Oh, yeah, there we go. And what's down here? Let's see. I love this film. Yeah? Could be food? No? 2 of them here you have to open. Endless patience. Yeah, and this one. Let's let them all out. And then look at this. This is a very tricky gate. It's got a latch you have to pull up, which is pulling up, and then you have to move it sideways and get out, and it's on a spring. So it can look at ape experiments, which are going on in Japan. And the prime mover in these is a 7-year-old chimpanzee called a Yuma. So he challenged a Yuma to a test with him. And they had to memorize these cards as quickly as they could. And a Yuma, of course, beat him. So this is Ben here with his prizes. And this is a Yuma. And they've both been banned from Las Vegas. All right, so maybe our fellow animals are inferior in some ways. I mean, let's look at, they can't drive a car. Oh, wait, just a minute. Maybe they can. This is in New Zealand. This is an animal shelter that is trying to up its adoptions by showing the text. So, let me give you a different poem. Coat of fur, hat of feathers, lobsters boiled alive, shoes and bags and sundry leathers of animals who've died, hunted, trapped and torn apart for me to satisfy. But who am I, and what my rank, that I may live and they must die? And that's the question, why? I'm going to show you some pictures now. I'm going to ask you a little video. I'll ask you not to leave if it's too much. To remember that the investigators had to take them, that the animals had to endure what you see. If you can't look, please look down. Just listen and just stay. But these are two individuals who are being used in experiments that we are trying to stop. And here is another hideous experiment with primates. We were sued for trying to use this footage, but we won. These are animals on fur farms who are being killed by anal and vaginal electrocution. And the panic. You saw the elephants in the ringling video we showed earlier, being the babies being tied down in view of their mothers and beaten. Then there are lobsters and crabs who are dismembered alive, and their flesh and claws are pulled from their conscious bodies. There are wool lambs who have, this is shearing, and he's just banging that ram's head into the ground just because he's lost his temper. Frightened sheep who are being sheared and thrown and kicked down a shaft because time is everything. The sheep irritates him just by being alive, and it happens all the time. Wool. These sheep separated from their families, very gentle, very frightened, jammed into a container. They're in the heat, they're on their way to a ship to the Middle East. These calves taken away from their loving mothers. All mothers love their babies, and they are helpless to stop it from happening so that we can steal the milk meant for them. These cows having their horns burned out of their heads, and that's what happens on dairies. This frightened pig we've seen before being beaten on his way to become a hot dog. These ducks and geese who will refuse to leave an injured partner's side being alive, plucked for down that goes into comforters, pillows, and jackets. These racetrack horses being shipped here to Canada from the United States in all weather, 37 degrees below zero, 36 hours we followed this truck. And these snakes being skinned alive for a belt or a bag. Who are they and who am I that I should live and they must die? So that's Peta's campaign. It's called Never Be Silent. Because it is true that all it takes for evil to triumph is for enough good people to say and do nothing. And setting aside psychopaths, a lot of people don't have that seat of empathy developed in them. There was a study today that was on the BBC. Can you make people kinder if you try? And yes, you can. get a pair of shoes or a latte or whatever they were doing. And some decent person, someone in Florida actually, set up a little video and started to show Meet Your Meat, or the Paul McCartney Glass Walls video. And people were so stunned at what they saw that they burst into tears. Life is hectic. People are busy. Distractions are many. How can we compete with all the television shows and the magazines and the social media if we don't try? But if we try, we will reach some of the people some of the time. And they will go on to reach more people. And this is the reaction that we can get from them when we do, when we are never silent. We can inform people. There is no such thing as a responsible dog breeder. As long as there is one litter of cats or puppies who is being euthanized for want of homes. That as long as there's the truck and there's a knife across the throat, there is no such thing as humane meat. People can get other jobs. There were people who had plantations who had slaves. You could say the same thing. How am I going to pick my cotton? You know, markets change. And there is no such thing as a magic pill or a magic wand that gives us a no-kill nation. What we need is a no-birth nation, and then we'll get to a no-kill nation. We don't want shelters that are being taken over by hoarders. So that's where the emphasis must be, the consequences of looking at the things that happen to animals, of figuring out what we can do to make it better for them, and then trying, achieving our heart's desires. And don't think we can't. And Mark Twain wrote this wonderful story about a man on the banks of the Mississippi River. It was the first time a riverboat had been launched. And this riverboat was sputtering and churning, it wasn't going anywhere. And the man addressed the crowd and he said, look, you know, it's not going anywhere, it's not moving, it's not going, it's never start, it'll never start. And suddenly it leapt into action, and the wheel started turning, and it went off down the river, and he said, it'll never stop, it'll never stop. That's pessimism for you. And we can't afford to be pessimists. If we look at what's happening in the world and how far we've come, and I can see from 30 years back, since Peter's inception, the wonderful things that have happened. Yes, we've got this massive mountain to climb, and all these things that we have to stop. But we have come a long way. We have started. And we mustn't stop until the bullhook and the meat hook and the gavage pipe and the whips and the chains are in a museum somewhere, not in use. We should be like Nagadas. Nagadas was a 16-year-old boy who stood on a railway station platform once when Mahatma Gandhi came through with his people. And called out to him. He said, Bapu, Bapu being a charm's endearment, he said, Bapu, what should I do with my life? And Gandhi said, go out and educate others. And that's what Nagadas did until he died. And we can do that. Every time we go on Facebook or do anything, every time we talk to a neighbor, every time we hear a radio show, we pick up the newspaper, we can call in, we can write in, we can have a chat, we can post something. We can do everything. We can persuade everyone in the world to go and see Blackfish. That wonderful close all these hideous marine parks. And we can persuade people to see Ghost in Our Machine. And we can persuade people to think. We can influence human minds and human lives and teach people how easy it is to make kind choices. There are people here tonight who have groups like Pig Save and Cow Save who are anxious to get young people and people you know to just go once and look. They will never be the same again. I wish you all the success in the world, in all your activism. Please, take our materials, take glass balls, anything you want we don't have, ask us for. We will supply you with everything we possibly can. People should find you picture in your wake. Everybody knows which train or plane I've been on. It's quite the trail. So as the Hopi Indians said, let's hope we are the ones they've been waiting for. Thank you.